In medieval Scotland, winter was not a season you endured casually. It pressed in slowly day after day until choices disappeared. Wind crept through stone walls, daylight shrank, and fields offered nothing new. In that long silence, survival depended on meals that could be trusted. Barley porridge was not comforting or celebratory, it was reliable. And in winter, reliability meant life. Winter in medieval Scotland was not defined by dramatic snowfalls alone, but by something more exhausting. Cold mixed with constant dampness. Rain, sleet, and freezing wind settled into daily life and refused to leave. Stone houses trapped moisture, turning interiors cold and clammy, while peat fires struggled to dry the air. Daylight shortened sharply, limiting both work and movement. Once the sun set, cold returned quickly, filling every corner of the household. Fields offered nothing during these months. Vegetables disappeared early, livestock feed grew scarce, and hunting became unreliable. Travel was slow and dangerous, cutting communities off from markets and outside help. In this environment, hunger did not arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, meal by meal. People could not rely on variety or freshness. They relied on what endured storage, cold, and repetition. What stands out most is how winter reshaped priorities. Comfort mattered less than certainty. A meal did not need to be rich or enjoyable. It needed to appear every day without fail. The harshness of the season forced a kind of emotional discipline. People learned not to hope for abundance, but to prepare for endurance. Winter meals became predictable, stripped of choice, shaped entirely by survival rather than taste. Barley earned its place in medieval Scotland not because it was favoured, but because it survived where other grains failed. The soil was often thin and rocky, especially in upland regions, and the growing season was short. Wheat demanded warmth and stability that the Scottish climate rarely provided. Barley, by contrast, tolerated cold, wind, and poor ground. Even in difficult years, it offered a harvest that could be counted on. This reliability mattered more than yield size. A modest but consistent crop meant families could plan their winter stores with some confidence. Barley could be dried easily and stored for long periods without spoiling, making it ideal for regions where months passed without fresh food. Its presence across both highland and lowland communities shows how deeply it matched the land itself. What becomes clear is that diet followed geography, not preference. People did not choose barley because they loved it. They ate it because the earth allowed it. Survival was a negotiation with nature, and barley was one of the few crops that consistently answered. In winter, that quiet dependability mattered more than flavour, variety, or status. In medieval Scotland, cooking was constrained not only by ingredients, but by fuel. Firewood was limited, and peat had to be dug, dried, and rationed carefully. Long, high-heat cooking was impractical in winter, when every spark mattered. Barley porridge fit these conditions perfectly. It required only grain and water, and it could be cooked slowly over a low, steady fire without waste. Unlike bread, which needed ovens and sustained heat, porridge could be prepared directly at the hearth. A single pot could feed several people, stirred occasionally while other household tasks continued. This simplicity mattered in homes where time, warmth, and strength were all limited. Even children or the elderly could manage its preparation, ensuring meals did not depend on specialized skills or equipment. What is striking is how cooking methods shape diet. Meals evolved around what conserved energy, rather than what impressed. Porridge was not just easy to cook. It fit seamlessly into a winter routine built around endurance. It asked little from the household, while giving something essential in return. In a season defined by scarcity, a food that demanded so little fuel became quietly indispensable. Barley porridge offered more than warmth in the bowl. It provided sustained energy in a climate that constantly drained the body. Rich in carbohydrates, it released energy slowly, helping people remain active through long hours of cold labour. Unlike lighter meals, it did not leave hunger returning quickly. This mattered when additional food was uncertain or unavailable. Cold weather increased the body's need for calories simply to maintain warmth. Work did not stop in winter. Animals still needed care, fuel had to be gathered, and households required constant upkeep. Porridge supported this steady output without overwhelming digestion. Its softness made it easy to eat even when illness or fatigue reduced appetite, a common problem during harsh winters. What stands out is how practical nourishment replaced indulgence. Barley porridge did not provide excitement, but it provided reliability. It kept bodies functional rather than satisfied. In winter, that distinction mattered deeply. Strength was measured not by fullness in the moment, but by the ability to endure the next day. In that sense, porridge acted less like a meal and more like a daily reinforcement against cold, hunger, and exhaustion. In medieval Scottish households, barley porridge appeared with quiet regularity. Morning began with it, and evening often ended the same way. There was little variation in preparation, and rarely any alternative during deep winter. This repetition was not accidental. It was a survival strategy. When food options narrowed, consistency reduced uncertainty. People knew what would be on the table, even when almost everything else remained unpredictable. Eating the same meal day after day could seem bleak, but within the context of winter, repetition offered stability. It removed the daily question of what could be eaten and replaced it with a routine that required no decision. In a season where weather, health and labour were uncertain, this predictability carried emotional weight. Meals became markers of time rather than moments of pleasure. What stands out is how comfort shifted meaning. Comfort no longer meant variety or flavour, but the reassurance that hunger would be held at bay once again. The warm bowl at the hearth signalled continuity. Another day endured, another night survived. Barley porridge became less about nourishment alone, and more about rhythm. Its sameness anchored households in a winter that otherwise felt endless. Barley porridge crossed social boundaries in medieval Scotland. It was eaten by peasants, tenants, labourers, and even those in modest urban settings. Unlike foods tied to wealth or status, porridge carried no social distinction. It was not admired, but neither was it looked down upon. It simply existed as a practical necessity. This universality mattered in a society shaped by hierarchy. While clothing, housing, and possessions marked class differences, winter diets often narrowed those gaps. Everyone faced the same cold and the same scarcity. Barley porridge reflected this shared vulnerability. It was affordable, accessible, and adaptable to nearly every household situation. What becomes clear is that necessity flattened social divides. When survival was the priority, food lost its role as a marker of identity. Porridge did not announce who you were, it sustained who you needed to be in order to endure winter. In this way, barley porridge became one of the few elements of daily life that connected all levels of medieval Scottish society through the same quiet act of survival. One of barley's greatest strengths in medieval Scotland was not how it tasted, but how well it endured time. Once dried, barley could be stored for months without significant spoilage, even in cold and damp conditions. This mattered in a land where winter was long and storage spaces were basic. Grain sacks rested in lofts, barns, or corners of stone houses, exposed to fluctuating temperatures yet remaining usable. Unlike fresh foods that vanished early in winter, barley remained dependable. It required little attention once stored, no constant turning, salting, or smoking. This reduced labour at a time when energy was already stretched thin. Families could measure their stores, ration carefully, and plan meals with a degree of certainty. Knowing that grain would last through the season offered psychological relief as much as physical security. What becomes clear is how survival relied on patience rather than abundance. Barley did not promise richness, it promised continuity. Its ability to wait quietly through months of cold made it ideal for winter life. In a season defined by delay and endurance, a food that simply stayed usable became invaluable. Barley porridge was prepared where warmth already existed, at the hearth. The fire was the centre of the medieval household, and porridge fit naturally into that space. A pot simmered while stories were shared, tools repaired, or children warmed their hands. Cooking and living blurred into the same activity, reinforcing the link between food, heat, and shelter. Meals were rarely solitary. Porridge was ladled into shared bowls or individual wooden vessels, eaten together in silence or quiet conversation. This routine created structure within the long winter days. Time was marked not by clocks, but by the return to the fire and the familiar meal. What stands out is how food reinforced connection. In a harsh environment, survival was collective. The repeated act of gathering around the hearth strengthened family bonds and created a sense of continuity. Barley porridge was more than nourishment. It was part of the household rhythm that made winter bearable. When barley porridge disappeared from the household, winter quickly became more threatening. Diets grew unstable, meals irregular, and hunger returned sooner and more sharply. Without a steady source of calories, bodies weakened under the combined pressure of cold and labour. Strength faded first, then resistance to illness. What might have been a manageable sickness in warmer months became dangerous when nutrition failed. Hunger altered behaviour as well as health. People conserved energy by working less, which in turn reduced their ability to gather fuel or tend animals. This created a downward cycle that winter exploited mercilessly. In isolated communities, the absence of a dependable staple could mean the difference between endurance and collapse. Food scarcity was not dramatic starvation at first, it was slow erosion. What stands out is how fragile survival truly was. A single missing element, a grain that could be stored, cooked and repeated, shifted the balance. Barley porridge acted as a stabiliser in a volatile season. Without it, winter exposed how close daily life stood to danger. Survival depended not on abundance, but on the quiet presence of something dependable. Barley porridge did not symbolise joy, celebration or comfort in the modern sense. It symbolised endurance. In medieval Scotland, winter survival rested on repetition, simplicity and restraint. People lived not by seeking pleasure, but by maintaining balance. The same meal eaten daily reduced risk and preserved strength. What feels most human in this story is the acceptance it reveals. People adjusted expectations to reality rather than resisting it. They did not demand variety from a season that offered none. Instead, they leaned into routine, trusting that consistency would carry them forward. In doing so, they transformed an unremarkable food into a lifeline. The lesson is quiet but enduring. Survival often depends less on abundance than on reliability. In difficult periods, what sustains us is rarely exciting or indulgent. It is what shows up every day, asking little and giving just enough. Barley porridge reminds us that resilience is built not through grand solutions, but through steady habits that hold life together when conditions offer no alternatives.